After watching Seth's more humorous review of Arcanum, today we're going to be watching Mandalore's more probably in-depth review of the game. Now, Arcanum's setting is quite intriguing, considering the conflict that arises between the science and the magic side of things. I'm hoping we'll learn more about why everybody hates the gnomes, which I kind of know a little bit about now, considering all the stuff that I learned from the comment section of Seth's video, as well as Mandalore's review of the banana bread recipe. Hopefully he made it. I'd like to know his opinion on it. But yeah, as always, this is a reaction video. Please go and support the OG video before watching this one. Link to that is at the very top of the description. That's going to be the best way to watch this because I'll be pausing quite a lot and commenting about various things about the game. But yeah, without further ado, let's get right into it. Is this the opening cinematic, or is this something Mandalore custom made? You can never tell.
Arcanum is an RPG that I like to play in the fall if I can. It is a fantasy game, but made by Troika, whose founders were instrumental in making the original Fallout games. So as you'd expect—
Oh, yeah, that's right. I had made a comment on Seth's video that, like, the game, it kind of reminded me of Fallout 1 and 2, but I wasn't really too sure about that because I had never played those games myself. I just seen, like, screenshots here and there. And I believe somebody did actually comment underneath that video, confirming that, yeah, it reminds you of that because it's made by the same devs. I didn't know that because my only experience with Fallout is Fallout New Vegas, made by Obsidian, which we're currently streaming here on the channel. And I thought they also made 1 and 2 mistakenly, but yeah, I guess not. It makes a whole lot of sense because it doesn't really seem to be their style.
This setting already has some bite to it. But if you really take the time to explore the game, there are some dark dealings underneath it all. This all comes packaged inside of an incredibly unique game. It has lots of other merits it can stand on, and plenty of flaws. Like the game engine being an absolute nightmare. Playing it is one thing, and recording it nicely is another. Luckily, there's a good one-stop solution. This is the unofficial Arcanum patch by Drog Blacktooth. He's a Ukrainian modder who's one of the few people on the planet who can actually wrangle the engine.
Also, what was that advertisement on the right there? Overwatch 2. Oh man. We're also playing Dawn of War here on the channel, and that one, I gotta like jump through a few loopholes in order to make it work on my modern PC. It certainly wasn't built for my 4K monitor. Like, thank goodness for modders, man.
It has tons of fixes, enhancements, and a few options. I'll be playing without those, but keep in mind you can completely change the XP system or even play some races that you couldn't previously. So there's a lot to dig through. For the vanilla player, some assets have been made high quality, including the music, and you can play the game in proper widescreen, so no more of the awkward stretching. That said, you can set the resolution high, like absurdly high. That won't scale well and can lead to weirdness, so stick with the holy 1366 by 768. This will give you more screen space without making the UI the size of bacteria. It also keeps your range of view in line with what the developers intended. It does fit—
Yeah, that was an issue with Dawn of War as well. I needed a mod that changed the text size in order to fit 1080. Can't even go to 4K. I don't think I'll be able to until we hit Soulstorm or something like that. Not sure.
Fix a ton of different bugs, but there are still plenty that remain. This was one of the buggiest CRPGs on release, and even with the big fan patch, it's still a contender. And this could be as good as it gets.
Why do all the great games out there just are kind of incomplete and buggy messes, but they're just so good inherently that, like, you can't not play it? As mentioned previously, Fallout New Vegas is fantastic so far. Like, I've been loving the story and all the interactions and such great voice work as well. But man, to get that thing to work takes a lot.
Before the Russian shit show had gone into full swing, Drog Blacktooth had been offline for about a year. At the time of recording, he's still missing, and I hope he's okay. So that's where we're at as far as stability goes. With that out of the way, let's talk about the setting of Arcanum. It's a fascinating world, and the fact that only the single game explores it really is a crime. So the simplest way to put it is that this is the—
That's actually a good point. Like, considering how long the manual was, I think it was like 187, 189 pages long. They spent a lot of time building up this world and how it works and how things interact with each other. In order for it to be contained to this one obscure CRPG, it really is a shame, because I can see so many different games spawning from that setting, which I think a lot of series should pay more attention to, because if you have a good foundation for your world and characters that people can relate to and all of these things, it might not directly affect the gameplay itself, not to a major degree, but it can get people invested within your IP. Kind of a similar situation as to like League of Legends, where the universe itself is fantastic, and I think the stories that are told there are great. And then you can spawn like multiple different games there just from this one setting. But that isn't to say that League of Legends is like a great game to play, considering, you know, the reputation of the community. Don't get me wrong, I think as a MOBA it's pretty solid, but if I wanted to get my friends into something like Arcane, and then they want to be like, oh, I want to play the game now, I would highly recommend them not to. Just like stick to the lore.
D&D during an industrial revolution. You have orcs, you have steam engine trains, you have magic, you have factories, you have orcs forming unions at the steam engine factories. Science is moving at a pace far faster than ethics can catch up. You see the effects of it all over the game and can dig deep into the implications of it and how it affects everyone. Of course, you might be wondering, if technology is that far ahead, how the hell do you mix that with magic? You know, if you can snap your fingers and make fire, then who invents a Zippo? Well, for one, technology is far more accessible. You could spend years training some Wedgie-mancer to master throwing a lightning bolt, assuming they're even magically inclined. Or you could spend a week or two training a bunch of farmhands how to use a gun. In Universe, this idea was put to the test in a war between two kingdoms with disastrous results. Though there is another layer in how technology and magic interact. It's explained in-game in a few points, but the manual has some of the best examples, and it's just an awesome manual in general. See, technology works within the confines of physical natural law. A steam engine works within rules that don't change, like energy and gravity. Better technology accounts for more rules and more variations, but the law itself doesn't change. An object's weight may change at a higher elevation, but the concept of weight doesn't break.
But yeah, Magic users can't get near machines because they literally change the laws of the world, at least from my understanding, which causes machines to break down.
Magic is nonsense that does whatever it wants. For magic to even exist, it must break and warp every physical law you know of. Casting a reading light might change how friction works in a small radius around you. Now, this doesn't matter a lot if you're in some medieval village or a field, but say you're near objects or devices that highly rely on these laws. So what if friction changes for a moment when you're in some room? However, this becomes less fun and whimsical when you're, say, riding on a train. You just want to magic away little problems, so what if things change?
Just a small
little
magic.
Trains like rules like that working. That's why you get to go through the enchanted TSA before being allowed to board, where carrying a wand and an owl might as well brand you as a member of ISIS. More magic can mean needing to ride in the back of the train where there's no chance of messing up the steam engine. Too much magic means you're not allowed to ride and no fast travel for you. Though you might be able to teleport around, so who cares? Still, in a world where common people can enjoy more benefits, this means magic users are more innately disruptive. Magic adds randomization to how an inclined plane works. Let's try electricity now. You're powerful if you can use magic, but also becoming a kind of social outcast in a changing world. It's interesting because it explores magic as being real as, what if magic was real? It's not something like a shoved-in racism allegory since they just talk about racism. I mean, there's a series of books called The Orcish Question, they're just fucking going for it. Well, come to think of it, some races are more innately magical, so what happens to them when the world changes too far? There's a different book that explores that. It's just neat to explore these ideas as these ideas. If there's a social issue they want to explore, they just explore it. So it gives you unique, memorable situations instead of an allegorical nightmare casserole. You know, like, whatever the fuck is going on in Dragon Age.
I believe that
Dragon Age. I have been recommended to check out Dragon Age at some point, or play the video games. Because apparently some of the older Dragon Age games were basically like Knights of the Old Republic, which I really enjoyed. I've heard the new one came out with pretty mixed reviews though. I don't know too many opinions on like speaking about social issues or political issues within media because it's kind of a form to express that anyways. All I can really say is I appreciate its more straightforward nature of tackling the issues and not trying to like mask it with something else. But even those issues when tackled in a more roundabout way can be good, depending on what angle you take it in. But obviously that feels like it opens up a whole lot more problems with different ways that your story can end up failing. Because maybe that new direction doesn't really quite land with your audience.
I am fortunate to have been spared a lot of the problems others have been experiencing with their workers. I do believe it is because I treat my workers better than most. Why, their working conditions are almost human.
That sounds like modern day companies. Dude, just the fact that they expect so much from you and give you so little. And there are literally like some states out there where you have to work 2 full-time jobs just to live. I don't know. That's insane. I don't think that's living. You're gonna have to do that till you retire, or unless you get promoted and get a new job. I've just been incredibly fortunate that this YouTube thing has, for the most part, worked out. But if it didn't, then yeah, I don't know where I would be.
There's also no dark magic or ooh, evil forbidden magic. It's all context sensitive. How you use magic will affect how people respond to you. It's just another tool. Though if something like raising the dead is something that would take a mage years to learn and figure out all the dangers of, what happens when any Joe Schmo can raise the dead? Should they be able to? Should anyone do this? I feel like I'm already getting ahead of myself, but Arcanum just does that. I'll get into where the plot kicks off before I go too far.
Huh. It wasn't an edit from Seth. Okay. This is the actual opening cutscene. Gotcha. I was wondering.
You're taking a ride aboard the first blimp in Arcanum's maiden voyage, the IFS Zephyr. Things take a turn for the worst when it's attacked by ogre raiders and airplanes. If you've read the manual, or a fairy tale, you'll know that ogres aren't too bright and definitely didn't build these. The very first blimp is being attacked by the first planes. The blimp eventually does go down, and one bandit is scratched for the trouble. The only two survivors are you, and an elderly gnome. He says he's come to warn about a great evil, giving you a ring and telling you to find the boy, and he'll know what to do from there. Then he dies. The second you crawl out of the wreckage, you're ambushed by Virgil. He's a new acolyte of something called the Panari religion and believes you to be extremely important. You surviving the blimp crash aligns with the Panari prophecy in a Book of Revelations kind of way. Virgil believes you are the living one, the reincarnation of some kind of elf Jesus who will strike down the evil one who will soon rise. Christ was also called Jesus of Nazareth, and in our setting, our elf savior is called Nazredin. That could make it easier to remember. Not only have you crashed in the mountains directly next to an altar for this prophecy, but there are a group of assassins out to kill any survivor of the wreck. So you can go with Virgil's plan as you try to find where the ring goes, or just ditch him from the get-go. You don't have to be Dante just because he showed up. And that's about all you need for now. Let's look at the visuals.
What is this?
For a 90s CRPG, it looks okay, except that it came out in 2001. All the movement and animation has this kind of clunky jerkiness to it. It's to a point where I genuinely can't tell if the original Fallout did it better or not, and Fallout came out 4 years before this. Speaking of which, the world itself usually has a very similar color palette to Fallout.
Yeah, I've never actually seen gameplay of that, but that does look pretty good. I mean, I don't really have any issues with the graphics itself, which probably comes from me just not having much experience with this type of game. It's like a, what do you call this in English? Like an isometric camera angle? Don't really play these kind of games often, or actually at all. So I've got no point of reference for what is good and what isn't.
No, it's not as brown because a nuke didn't go off in most of the map, but even when it's more green, it's generally a washed out and muddy place unless you're in the most enchanted of forests. There are still some striking buildings and places to see in the game, but it's overall washed out and muted. Now this does fit the tone way better than having it be a Skittles fantasy wonderland, but there were points where I think it could have broken from the mold a bit more without hurting it. It's frequently dark and gloomy even when the game says you should be in the height of comfort. It makes it even harder for my brain to escape Fallout when I play it. Even when areas are really prettied up, the ghost of it is always there. This is one of the main reasons I like to play it more in the fall if I can. The dark griminess is perfect for what you're uncovering, even if the game can just look downright ugly at points. Also the gore. Getting punched by an elemental and your head flying off is very Fallout. The kills can be damn brutal, and it's something nice to say about Arcanum's combat. There won't be a whole lot of that, so it's not a great looking game, but there are some neat flashes.
Well, from my understanding, the combat is just not very good in general, which is unfortunate considering the story and the world itself is fantastic. But I guess not everything can be amazing.
Flashes here and there. As for audio, it's a mix of higher highs and lower lows. A lot of the interface sounds are good, but the game's soundscape when it comes to the environment and combat is pretty generic. At worst, there can be a lot of annoyances, like looping sound effects from spell buffs. Drog's patch actually has an option to straight up remove annoying sound effects because there are so many to find. Oh, that's why I never summon the familiar. See, that's pretty funny until you have an army of them.
Oh god.
Let me switch to real time. These moments...
What is it with older video games and just constantly looping audio like this? I guess maybe there was never really a system where like maybe we should have a buffer to our audio. Because like in Dawn of War 1, one of my main issues with it is that while everything about it is pretty fantastic from the visuals to the gameplay, whenever you click on a unit, they always have something to say. Like, they always will. But it never accounts for, like, when a story segment is happening and the Space Marine is narrating his thing, but then you also click on him and then he also says a thing, and so the two audios kind of overlap on each other, and so you don't understand either of them. I guess this just wasn't really a thought process back in the day. Because, yeah, there's so many games have this.
Aren't too often, but it does help combat feel like more of a mess. There are two audio standouts, and the first is the voice acting. There aren't a ton of voiced characters in the game, and those who do speak might only have a few lines. Only Virgil and the most plot-significant characters will have a lot to say.
My crime, it seems, is even more heinous than I thought. I deserve much worse than this mere isolation.
Where do you
Good
ask?
acting.
You're not a labor sympathizer, are you? A unionizer, perhaps? I can assure you, my workers are happy to have the jobs I give them.
There's something like 24 followers you can recruit in the game, but only a handful of those have a voice. Those that do usually have precious few lines, too. There are plenty I wish I could have heard more input from, but they were stretched thin already. Like Gar, the world's smartest orc.
Yes, Gar like tea. Gar civilized. Gar
civilized.
Grey best. Made from blend of black teas and oil from the bergamot plant. Excellent, Gar say. Oh, come now, that is rubbish. Green tea is for the foreign constitution, not for consumption by those with discerning... Gar no like
Oh
green
no,
tea.
God.
This is reflective of the whole game, really.
Oh, that's great. I don't know. It's a classic trope, but I love that trope. It's always just so fun.
Arcanum spends a lot more time fleshing out the setting than it does going too deep into any of the characters. It gives you a few to kind of unpack, but focuses more on giving you more options for replay. That brings us to our second standout, which is the music. The game is set in an otherworldly 1800s, and the music reflects it. Instead of big, epic Baldur's Gate orchestra, it's string quartet. Not to say a big symphony is bad for an RPG, but there's a different idea behind Arcanum. You're not necessarily...
Yeah, exactly. Pretty much along the same lines as what I said in Seth's video. It's just nothing to write home about, but it's fitting for the setting. And that's really what this game OST was trying to achieve, and what most game OSTs try to achieve. Like, imagine this game with this gameplay, but you have the Nier Automata soundtrack. I mean, it would sound great, but I don't think it really fits the tone that we're going for here. Vastly different settings with a different approach to gameplay.
necessarily playing a heroic character, so you don't have a heroic theme. This is why the main theme is a whole mix of different emotions and tone. They're all possibilities. I feel like shit having to interrupt the Arcanum theme, but if I don't, I'll get stuck here. The combat music is more percussion heavy and still very fitting and welcome. The combat tracks in particular do have that age-old RPG problem where there just isn't enough variety for the amount of time you're playing it. The game could have gotten a ton more mileage out of a few more combat tracks, especially when the one you hear the most is reused for the Dwarven areas. It's nice clanking, but it keeps coming back. Anyway, properly getting started, your first step is character creation. There are some presets too, and the ones you don't pick can be found dead around the Zephyr crash site. It's still well worth the time
I
going
see.
custom, especially with how many rich backgrounds there are. You can be raised by snake handlers, be an escaped lunatic with combat bonuses, or be a special person who has intelligence lost from brain damage. But this makes people like you more if you're good because they're just so charmed by that. Backgrounds are never brought up directly in conversation, but they add a lot of fun variation. On the other hand, your gender, and especially your race, will be incredibly significant. People who were nice to you when you played as a human or an elf can completely become different people if you play as a half-orc or an ogre. You might lose some quests while new ones open up, and you might pay more for a worse room at an inn. You might have to overcome so much more just to reach a simple interaction that another character might not even think about. Though
I mean, hey, racism. It exists. I can assure you that being a male VTuber who has tan skin on his VTuber model certainly invites a lot of that. But I mean, it's even worse in real life when you experience that every single day because it's just so ingrained into the culture.
people looking down on you is something you can use to your advantage too. Because they underestimate your capabilities, you can get the drop on them in many situations. So this is one of your biggest decisions. It's not a throwaway, a half-orc line, it's get the fuck out of my bar, or cops eyeing you up, and you'll never be invited to the phrenology department party. Race can be a complicated thing, and Arcanum is no different. Actually, it might be way more complicated here.
Oh god. Oh no, do I want to see this? Why is the dwarf female censored? What is going on there? I wonder if Mandalore is going to touch upon it in this video, but from the comments section on Seth's video, I can presume that a lot of the jokes that he made were not jokes.
After this is where you choose your initial stats, skills, spells, and schematics. Your stats have all kinds of effects, and they also determine how many points you could put into a skill, and each skill has 5 levels. There are 16 skills across 4 categories: combat, stealth, social, and technology. Though separate from tech skills, there are 8 different technology disciplines. These can range from mechanical engineering, electrical, chemistry, gunsmithing. Knowledge in a field grants you schematics and lets you understand more advanced schematics. You can find or buy these in the world, and once you do, you can craft all kinds of useful objects. If you're playing something like a gunslinger, being able to craft your own bullets can be essential. Or maybe you want to be a smart boy who doesn't do the fighting, and that's what the robots are for. Though a lot of this depends on you actually being able to hunt down the parts. And even then there are ways to get around actually having points in the field, and technology is a bit of a mess in Arcanum. It's still doable, but clunky for a first time build, and there are some other reasons for that too, which I'll get into soon. Then you have 16 schools of magic with 5 spells each. Everything you've seen so far, whether it's a stat or a spell or a skill or a technology field, it all costs the same point. You've got a huge amount of options, and yes, if it seems too complicated, you can pick an auto level up scheme based on some classes. What's important is that Arcanum isn't very good as a jack-of-all-trades game. There are some things restricted to good and evil alignments, and how you actually get up to the ending of the game can vastly change based on that. But remember our laws of magic? Well, that carries on into the gameplay. Your aptitude towards tech or magic is also measured. You can play the entire game with this at 0, but when you start putting points in technology disciplines or magic schools, then it'll start to skew over. This gives boons to what you're leaning towards and disadvantages for the other side. If you're too magic, tech shops don't even want you close to their inventory, but your spells scale better. As a necromancer, the exact same summon undead spell will give you tougher monsters. At the same time, tech becomes much more unstable to use. You might just miss attacks more or atomize yourself with your own rifle. These principles work in reverse too, like tech characters can't use magic scrolls. Also, technology reinforces the laws of natural law around it, or some shit like that, so more advanced technology acts as a magic dampening field. This means a follower like Virgil, who's an incredibly effective magic healer, becomes more and more useless to a tech character, so they'll need to seek out more potions or healing skills or other more pain-in-the-ass methods, unless you build the mechanical healing spider. Skills themselves can be trained more outside of points, which gives all kinds of
I'm glad that it actually has some bearing on the gameplay as well. And it's not just like a lore thing. I mean, this extends to the character and race that you choose to play as well. It's not just a neat thing that you picked at the beginning of the game and doesn't really change anything. It literally changes how you experience the story.
Bonus effects. And then master levels can have special missions attached to them, so every replay is even more different, and man, there are so many ways to play. I should go over some. My first character is Windsor McScammington, the protege of a charlatan. He's all about persuasion and making deals and has high charisma. Having high charisma in Arcanum lets you recruit more followers, which starts easy enough in the first town by convincing a drunk half-ogre to tag along, but as he grows in power, he assembles a certified hit squad. Training up persuasion lets him recruit followers he might not be able to otherwise based on alignment. They're also more forgiving of who he murders, which is good because Scammington is also a necromancer. You can kill everyone in the game and still beat it. But conjuring spirits still means I could pull information from dead key characters. Several whodunit quests can be made way easier by just raising the victim's spirit and asking what happened. If a follower dies, they can be made undead until receiving proper resurrection treatment. You can summon the undead out of thin air, resurrect the dead, resurrect the undead. It's one of the best RPGs you can play a necromancer in. There are just so many options. Not
Just the fact that we have this one spell, Summon Undead, and you can talk to everybody is like mind-blowing, and they must have had to think about this, right? When they added the spell to the game, like, oh gosh, we're gonna have to write text for every single character that can die. That makes sense for the situation that happened. Or like even solving that whodunit kind of investigation side as well. That like this is a viable method in order to solve the issue. But it's really the core strength of RPGs that any problem that you present to the player should have multiple different solutions to it. Or else your gameplay is just flat.
Not many games have ice gorillas you can fight and then turn into your thralls. Most spirits appear to be in horrible pain and not happy to be back in the material world, but the game accounts for them. You can just say, I'm a necromancer and I talk to them. Not interested in doing some shitty quest for information? Well, dead men do tell tales when they really want to go back to the afterlife. My other character is an ogre named Clug Slabbrain. He has borderline starfish IQ, but he's strong and wants to do the right thing. Where Virgil had to make an appeal to a smarter character like Scammington, the dynamic is completely different here. Now he's in caretaker mode, constantly on the verge of a mental breakdown, finding out that Elf Jesus is back in the body of an idiot.
Why did the gods return your spirit in this defective shell?
Clug is fast too, and even in the first area, Virgil can barely keep up. To make matters worse, Dr. Steve Brule can't mangle a name like Clug can. What do we do now, Horatio?
Virgil.
Horatio. Not gonna lie, I kinda love this. If I ever play a game, play this, or play anything similar, kinda want to do a character like this. In New Vegas, I went full science man, full intelligence and whatnot. Maybe I should do the opposite next time.
My name is Virgil!
What do we do now, Valhalla?
I don't even know what you just called me.
He's too dumb to know spells, too dumb to spell words. Even some racist characters are more offended by how stupid he is over anything else. And I'm honestly angry he's able to read the newspapers. But he's still a good boy, and some people find it endearing when he introduces himself as dumb. Sure, he might lose out on followers and understanding most of the plot, but boy can he go through those dungeons fast. This is the most entertaining game to play a dumbass in. More so than any of the Fallouts. Sometimes you are—
Oh, okay, well, there you go. Well, dang, dude. I mean, if Mandalore says it, then it must be true.
Are too dumb for quests, but if you really don't want to miss out, there are some temporary intellect potions around. So Clug can just snort up some flowers for Algernon before the big test. This sudden shift can make people uncomfortable, but they'll deal with him then. Afterwards, he could get back to calling the wizard Jongle Dune Jingle, or Jungle Jim, and just get back to doing regular Clugisms. It's a simple example, but shows just how different two playthroughs can be. All these dignified, self-important 19th century characters, and they have to deal with a living rock.
You go to island where bad people are.
There's a lot that's cool about Arcanum's thought-out systems. There are also plenty of skills and aspects that could be easily replaced. Scammington is a persuasive character, and how persuasion works in this game is great. He can come up with better arguments or better lies, but only based on things he knows. For example, the first small town you get to has a gang of bandits guarding the bridge. They want a protection fee to pass, and their leader thinks he's an educated genius. Except he doesn't know what any words actually mean and calls himself Lucan the Witless. He calls himself a thief extraordinaire, and if you're too wordy with him, he calls your words flatulent. The dude just flat out doesn't know what the fuck he's saying. If you get on his case about it, it'll lead to a fight. But naturally, you can convince him to let you pass. He's a moron, but he's not Clug. You can pretend you're from a guild of thieves and that he's muscled in on your territory. The thing is, if you try to lie with something he knows beyond doubt is a lie, the jig is up. He knows you're trying to fleece him, and any further persuasion attempts aren't going to work. It's like this with every character when you're attempting persuasion. No matter—
This game doesn't have any indication of like, oh, this option is the lie option, and you have a certain skill check level in order to achieve this, which can be good or bad, depending on the player and what they prefer. It can be very rewarding, though, when you out-talk an NPC by choosing options that you think are correct, or manipulating them in just the way that you need to, without any kind of guidance from the game.
No matter how good and tear-jerking your story is about how good friends you are with the guy you're trying to get to, and his mom, the story isn't going to work if the guard knows he's an orphan. Persuasion is still incredibly powerful, but it's not a magic spell, and you benefit more from it the more you actually know about the world and the setting. On top of just having the skill, you still have to carefully think and choose your options. Now you could put a point in persuasion or a different skill like Gambling? You can win money playing dice with dock workers, and if you do train it up, you can win some pretty powerful items with it. It's not nearly as overpowered as Fallout 1's gambling, but it's okay, I guess. Okay, how about—
I didn't realize that luck was such an OP stat in Fallout games. That's another build I need to try at some point in my life. Just go full luck and then head straight to New Vegas.
the beauty stat? This will affect people's initial perceptions towards you, but that'll change rapidly once you two get talking. Something like lockpicking and pickpocketing could also be useful skills, but there's ways around that too. For one, Arcanum has something called fate points, which you get by achieving things in the story. You can spend one for a critical success at all kinds of skills. So an item that maybe only a master thief should be able to get, you can just—
Fate points. I was like, wait a minute. Ah, that's right. It's called the same thing in Wolfrup, or the Warhammer role-playing game. Been playing that a bit, and it's been really fun, actually.
just fate point away. Something like lockpicking doesn't matter much either when you can break open most doors and chests. If you save and recruit Dogmeat, aka the Destroyer of Worlds, not only do you get a powerful melee companion, but he doesn't have weapons to lose durability with. He's great at killing golems, and he's a universal guest key. No barrier or lock, no matter how ancient or arcane, can stop the power of the dog. Honestly, your party can still do this too, you don't lose a whole ton of durability by bashing. There are trap disarming skills, but not a whole lot of traps in the game after the Hell Gauntlet.
Actually, that's really funny. That the dog can break down doors without losing durability. That's like the most effective one. Because in Total War Warhammer, I think doggos still kind of are like the most effective at taking down a gate, a settlement gate. Something to do with how their models line up when they approach the gate and they all attack it at the same time. I guess dogs just beat doors in the universal rock, paper, scissors.
What? It's fun there are so many options, it's more that this game is extremely easy to break on every level. At the same time, they did have interesting, clever ideas on how they could balance it. Going back to the bridge bandits, Klug walks up and gurgles at them. Lucan takes pity on him, noticing that he is clearly mentally retardant. Oh, the tributaries that this man— Klug massacres the entire gang. He gets XP for doing this, not distributed on kills, but on hits. Here's the idea with that. Scamington's persuasive ways means he'll be offered all kinds of quests, and can even skip out entire dungeons through dialogue. He has a squad of followers too, so if they were all leveling up together, he would be absurd. So with the big party, they handle the combat that the necromancer spells and the zombies can't get. The gang as a whole is a lower level than average, but they're an effective fighting force. Klug is getting some quests and murdering most things nearly single-handedly. Him being better at combat and getting more hits in should make up for the loss of XP from getting less quests, right? Well, it does at first. For a while. You don't need to be max level to beat the game, but the balancing feels weird throughout all of it. There can be weird difficulty spikes inside the same dungeon. I've thought for a while about how to put into words what's wrong with the combat. You can switch between real-time and pause by pressing spacebar, but it's going to be the same level of pain. Do you want vibrating out of the material plane fast, or a DMV on a holiday slow? Combat is either laughably trivial, or a molasses wave of frustration. I don't think I've ever thought, that was a neat fight, while playing this game. Sure, it's funny when Klug wipes out the 3 bears in 3 seconds, but that's it. At its best, Arcanum's combat is extremely funny. Another reason I don't often use firearms is because bows exist.
Yeah, if I recall in real time, it just depends on how fast you can click. Which is great. That's awesome. The combat is meant to be hilarious. Well, I know it's not meant to be or intended to, but like that's just how the cookie crumbles, man. It's just, it doesn't seem too great.
You can cast spells or shoot as fast as you can click. The NPCs click fast, and this also goes for your enemies.
Jeez. It's getting deleted.
It seems like the general rule is, if you're just playing the game, leave it on real time. If you start to melt in 5 seconds, then switch on turn-based. I don't mind when an RPG has a harder encounter that you're supposed to come back to later, but Arcanum can switch things up in 10 meters. Even with a Klug build, it moves so fast that it's disorienting. Otherwise, it will go extremely slow even with the fast turn-based option. There's no sense of what the normal combat speed should be. None of this is normal, so pick your poison. I mean, you do have a crazy amount of options for what you can do in combat. There is merit in all those options, but even the encounters themselves aren't great either. Most of the combat dungeons you go through are so tedious and dull. Like, some of the largest ones are different sewers. The maps have such convoluted flow to them too, and there's rarely anything interesting to find. There can be exceptions to the rule, like finding a potential follower inside an ancient temple, or looking for dwarves when you stumble upon the lair of Kurgan, the first necromancer. He was a bad enough dude that Nazardin and the Ancient Council banished him into the void. These are neat additions, but again, they're neat additions for the story and the intrigue, not the combat. Now luckily, after the first third or so of the game, there aren't any more required big dungeons. In fact, the gauntlet leading up to the end is mercifully small and straightforward. If the combat was better, this would feel like a letdown, but instead, it's a feature. A lot of these are tied to optional stuff around the map, and there is a ton of this. You can travel around the map at a faster speed, only being stopped for a random encounter, but you can travel the map completely manually if you want. It'll just take something like 30 hours to cross it. That means if you find a dungeon, you can just leave. I think that alone seals it, but what about Klug? Combat meatheads like him are going to need more fights to keep up. Sure, he's slow, but deserves an arc too. You might have to do more dungeon diving to see it, but that's what you signed up for.
We need to... Hey, you called me Virgil. Good show! Perhaps you're wising up a bit after all.
So combat is bizarre. All kinds of systems are a mess, like alignment, for example. If you want to cheese it, you could just shower a beggar with money until you ascend to heaven, or yell at them to get a job until you become Satan. If it's that rough, why would anyone play this?
Wait, what was the text there? Klug did not and would not do this.
Why would anyone play this beyond it being fun to break? Are the world and interactions really that good? Yes, it is that good. Beyond the main quest, there's tons of stuff to do and so many ways to resolve many of the situations. The unified kingdom capital of Tarant is one of the most content-dense cities I've played in an RPG. There are obvious places to pick up missions, sure, but even random NPCs might have something to offer. There are mysteries to solve, dark, grand conspiracies, and just weird, fun little side stories. That Thieves Guild I mentioned before has over a dozen break-in and heist quests to pick up. There are exorcisms to perform and all kinds of missions that cross cities and kingdoms. That war I mentioned before between gunpowder users and sword conservatives is something you can really delve into. The Kingdom of Cumbria lost the war with Tarant and the rest of the Unified Kingdom. Their land is run down and rotting, both physically and politically. The current king's right to rule is dubious at best, and the trauma from the war has caused them to outlaw virtually all technology. Which isn't practical in this changing world, but it's not all black and white either. Cumbria had honorable virtues before, it's just the current system is the worst, most destructive parts of staying traditional at all costs. You can contribute to restoring this kingdom and finding its place in a new world without destroying its identity. The Unified Kingdom has issues too. Tarant used to be a monarchy, but technology destabilized power there too.
Yeah, this was kind of the impression that I got from Sat's review as well, and obviously the manual. But all these details between different factions, different characters, their dynamics between each other, obviously the dynamic between science and magic, plus the political intrigue, a lot of it was kind of carefully crafted together to make this living, breathing world where things are happening and you're actually changing something in it. With, of course, many different ways to go about doing so as well. And there are games out there that may attempt to do this but end up failing. This one, I feel like, has a good team behind it, just making sure all the writing stays consistent. Like, I don't think this would become a cult classic CRPG if there wasn't any value in playing it.
When the royal family was all found dead or missing, the Gnomish Merchants Guild took control. Profits and technological progress now eclipse all else, even as a ton of people suffer. The fate of the country can be decided by how you handle a side quest about an orc worker strike. This is all some side shit you can do.
Hey man, that's awesome. You actually get to see the consequences of your actions, which I think is an important aspect of any good RPG. It just hits different when you, say, go out and collect 100 wooden logs or something to give to some construction workers, and then they actually build a small little town out of that. Or like give materials to some random robot, and then in the distance you can see this massive sky tower start building itself up. It just feels nice, and you actually physically see the progress that you've made, whether for good or for bad.
There are 36 ending slides. A lot of what you do is taken into account. Though yeah, when the main quest takes you to new areas, the amount of quests you get do taper off, but it's still a hell of a lot more than most, and plenty of random locations and things to discover all the way up until the end. Speaking of, from here I'm going to talk about the main quest and that quest in more detail. So if you don't want spoilers,
that quest.
Go to here.
Well, I have seen some sentiment from peeps that I should just play the game. But if I'm being perfectly honest with you, I have about 3 years of backlog to get through. I don't think we'll ever be able to get to this game, so I'm here for the lore.
Find the boy and deliver the ring. Assassins are desperately searching for you and the ring. The only clue it offers are the initials GB. However, a local shopkeeper recognizes it as being from a store in Tarrant. There's a dwarf outside the store named Magnus who's also irritated he can't get answers from the store owners. Apparently they're reclusive, and even the doorman doesn't want to talk about what goes on downstairs. Magnus thinks they might have answers into what dwarven clan he hails from and tags along for the ride. Maybe. This turns out to be like finding a Diablo level beneath a JC Penney, and it becomes worse when you find that the lowest level is full of undead dwarves.
A Diablo level underneath the JC Penney. Unironically, I think that could be an interesting concept for a video game. It's like these normal, mundane, modern places, but then accidentally you discover a pathway into some sort of dungeon, and then it leads to this massive conspiracy. I think it's interesting, although it certainly would depend on the execution there.
The owners are a family of necromancers who found the dwarf tomb long ago and built a shop over it. Magnus is horrified because he thinks this might be his lost clan, but there's something strange about these dwarves. If you don't immediately murder the owners, they'll explain the situation. What they're doing is perfectly legal, but they're keeping it secret because it is unsavory. It becomes obvious that these aren't Magnus's ancestors, but they go farther to say that he shouldn't be offended. Noble dwarf clans always reside in the mountains, and this is out in the flatlands. They have sloped foreheads and extra fingers and toes. The necromancers doubt they were even literate, so they're already dead and even in life were likely freaks and outcasts, which makes what they're doing perfectly okay. This can end in violence, or nice and politely. This is a minor event in the grand scheme of things.
We hope you'll stop by in the future. Please visit again. Uh-oh, you discovered our secret underground undead dwarf army. Don't worry, they weren't intelligent.
But it does establish how far things can go in the setting for those deemed lesser. One way or another, you find out the ring belongs to Gilbert Bates. He's the inventor of the steam engine, and the rival to Cedric Appleby. Huh. Anyways.
Oh, that's amazing. I love that.
Bates is very interested in this ring. He's baffled to learn a gnome gave it to you, and when you describe him, it turns out it wasn't a gnome at all, but a dwarf named Stenar Rockcutter. This is near unthinkable, as dwarves have a saying that they'd rather cut their own throat than their beard. So Stenar had done that, and starved himself and withered away to disguise himself as a gnome. Bates is getting a sinking feeling about this. When Bates was a teenager,
I feel like in literally every depiction of a dwarf, their beard is the most important aspect of them. Like in Warhammer Fantasy, there is no greater shame than to shave off a dwarf's beard. There have been wars literally fought over that aspect. But it just goes to show you how important this task was.
He was a bit of a dwarf weeb, and still is really, but he hoped to be welcomed into the Black Mountain clan by showing how well he understood their technology. They laughed at him and humored him, and Stenar was his only real friend. It's revealed that Bates saw a steam engine in the corner of the Black Mountain hold. He saw the potential in it and tried to tell them, but they all just laughed him off again. So he sold an application of it to a human company, and it took off around the world. When Bates returned to the clan to show proof of his success, they were all gone. He was then threatened by hooded figures who said he could never reveal the origins of the steam engine, and so became known as its inventor. Stenar.
I see. So it was the dwarves who invented it first, but then the humans adopted it after this guy, Bates, introduced it to the world. Debatable whether this is going to be a good thing or not, considering how much conflict arises from it. But I suppose that's the inevitability of progress.
Stenar still called him the boy because dwarves live a lot longer than humans and probably got mixed up. It's possible there are still some clues in their old home, and you find plenty of monsters and plenty of dead assassins who also picked up on this trail. This is the Golem Cave dedicated to breaking your weapons, and it sucks. After crossing a Korean
I wonder where the dwarves went, though.
DMZ level of landmines, you do find a single Black Mountain clan survivor. He's gone crazy from being alone for decades, but says another dwarf clan, the Wheel clan, banished them. He carved the full story out in a rock behind him when he was less crazy. The crime was sharing technology with humans. And to make it even stranger, elves carried out the actual banishment. They sent the Black Mountain clan to a lovely retreat called the Isle of Despair. Their disappearance appears to be entirely Bates's fault.
So sharing the technology with the humans was considered a crime by the elves because obviously the elves are very proficient with magic. And because of that, you know, the humans obviously gain a lot more power and kind of offset things. I can see why they'd be mad.
He takes it well, all things considered, and arranges your passage to the Isle of Despair, which is a prison island. And guess what? There's no Black Mountain clan here either. Every time you think you have a lead, it just opens up a new mystery. All of Virgil's Panari spiel, saying you're the living one and Nazardan reincarnated, it seems completely unrelated. You do learn that the evil one is Aranax, who's just an ancient...
Well, keyword there seems completely unrelated. It might tie back in somehow. Also, this whole like elves taking over the world, becoming the ultimate rulers reminds me of Skyrim lore. I know very little about it, but what was his name? Pelinal Whitestrake? Something like that? The elf exterminator. A similar situation happened, and bro went sicko mode. Granted, he was a Terminator from the future, but still pretty epic nonetheless.
Elf supremacist. It would be like saying Christ will soon return to destroy the founder of the KKK. Like, Panari is a strange religion. There's some interesting stuff in the Isle of Despair. You can find an ancient crashed submarine which likely belonged to the Vendigroth civilization. They were very technologically advanced, but disappeared about 2,000 years ago. There's also a well-educated half-ogre prisoner who is a pretty rare find. He talks about books and his childhood memories of living in an orphanage. An all-half-ogre orphanage, which even he thinks is strange. Humans and ogres hooking up willingly is pretty rare, but that must have been the fad at the time. Otherwise, the crime would be so widespread and often that ogres would be hunted down and killed by now. So he's an interesting dude. There's also a prisoner who has a part for an ancient Vendigroth gun. Back on track, the prison's leader is a dwarf, but he's a Wheel Clan dwarf. He tells you the Black Mountain clan never showed up there, so you should go check in with the Wheel Clan. This is really emphasizing the setting over character aspect I mentioned earlier. Bates is probably the most developed so far, but it's not a whole ton. There is some irony in that as much as he loves the dwarves, he has a lot of underlying anger for them not accepting him. As a short-lived human, he didn't have their aged wisdom, and they thought he had nothing to contribute. He felt so strongly against this that it significantly shaped his life, and then he'll turn around and do the same thing to the races working in his factories. So it's something.
Well, that's the thing, right? Hypocrisy. That's also what makes him very human.
If Magnus is still around, you'll learn he's a city dwarf trying to figure out what being a dwarf actually means. And his How to Be a Dwarf culture manual was written by a human. Virgil has an uncanny amount of
Oh my god. Oh no. Oh jeez. Learning how to be a member of your own culture from somebody outside of your culture. Sounds so cursed. Could you call this cultural appropriation? I mean, it's not normally used in this context, but it kind of feels that way. Granted, we don't know this person who wrote this book about dwarven culture. Maybe they had assimilated themselves in with the culture and have a deeper understanding of it. So you can't completely dismiss it, but it is just kind of strange. It reminds me of that situation, I think it was at like the Game Awards or something like that, where this guy performed a song for Ghost of Tsushima using like a traditional Japanese instrument. I forget exactly what it was called. But I mean, the guy clearly wasn't Japanese, and I think at the time so many people were very angry at him, and they called it cultural appropriation. But then the Japanese community came out and said that he was like the last living master of this instrument, and he had learned all about it and it had been passed down to him. So like, if he wasn't the one playing it, then who would? I think that's how that whole situation went. So yeah, with this dwarf book, there might be more to it. We need to know more details.
Street knowledge and implies things were very different before joining the Panari, but he's still not opening up a lot. So it's all about the mystery. When you get to the Wheel Clan, they're still kicking along, but have seen better days. Their leader is the Prince, currently ruling over with the title of King in Waiting. The real king, Loghaire Thunderstone, has been gone for decades. After overseeing the Black Mountain clan being hauled off by the elves, he was so overcome with grief that he banished himself to the Dredge. It's a terrible mud labyrinth inside the mountain, and we can skip over that with persuasion. The prince talks to Dad just about daily. In fact, he's right behind the store.
What?
Quiet. This insolence is unforgivable. The violation of my ancient right for solitude in exile is not broken so easily.
I could listen to Loghaire talk for hours, and while he doesn't go on that long, he is enlightening. The other races consider technology in the hands of humans dangerous because of their short lives. In his view, everything humans do is fueled by the fear of death and their relative instant gratification.
Not wrong, but also not entirely correct. Because, well, when it comes to these fantasy settings, with humans having a shorter lifespan, they do tend to take more risks. They don't really have the time to dilly-dally on things or debate something for like 100 years and see if it actually works or not. You just gotta do it and get it done and move on to the next thing. Because inherently we're aware of the amount of time that we have on this world is limited. So yeah, I can see why other races would consider that to be a negative, but there are also many positives to it as well. You kinda gotta take the good with the bad.
Humans are fascinated by the effects a new thing can bring now and not thinking about the long-term consequences, which you have been seeing throughout the entire game. Bates did screw up, but his line of thinking wasn't special.
His first thought was, what can I use this for? When it should have been, what is the cost of its use?
Fair enough.
Technology exploded in their hands because they are not burdened with our longevity. Humans rarely live long enough to see the consequences of their mistakes.
As for what specifically
That is some really good voice acting. And when he puts it like that, there isn't really any place that you can disagree. That is likely what Bates was thinking as well, and what anybody in his situation would think.
happened, humans began cutting down trees. Their logging was so efficient that they were wiping out huge areas of elven forests, and we know how elves always feel about trees. They were
Yeah.
so angry that they personally wanted to carry out the punishment, and if the Wheel Clan wouldn't let them, they would declare war on all dwarves. Loghaire let them, felt ashamed for letting them, and exiled himself. If you know dwarven philosophy, you can convince him to return to the throne. The Wheel Clan will be ecstatic about this if you do, but now regardless, you have to find the elves. Finding them can involve hunting down Arcanum's Bigfoot, but I don't want to get into that. The elves are in the Glimmering Forest, but where in the forest? In the trees. In what trees? In the Glimmering Forest. Okay
Bruh.
then.
Please, we must cease our attack upon such a good soul.
He's not good, Gar, he's an elf. Sorry sir, you're dead. Where are the elves? Where's Kentara? In the forest. Trees.
No!
Oh, look at that. It's the elves. And get
Okay.
this. They've never
Bruh.
heard of any of this happening. When you speak to their
What?
ruler, she only speaks in riddles. They've been living in their collection of fancy trees and have nothing to do with the dwarves. Instead, it may have been dark elves.
Well, I believe that may have been so because Mingarad is a dark name.
Of course they did, so now you've got to find out where the—
Greetings, traveler. It seems to me that you're looking for answers.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, just
And you
answer
then
them for
get a
me.
random encounter with Aranax. He confirms that whether or not you're the living one, the reincarnation of Nazardin, he will be coming back soon, and he will face you down. And so far, this still seems like it has nothing to do with the main quest. Finding the Dark Elves will mean locating a book with their location. Back in the capital, you stumble across a guy looking for another guy, and this leads to a lot of intrigue around a set of skulls. They're from a set of conjoined Siamese twins, and the man who sent you to find them says they're proof of a massive breeding experiment. He wants you to find his partner, who is missing where he tells you to look, but you happen to find him
Not
again in the
good.
same town where you're seeking out the Dark Elf book. The strange amount of half-ogres in the kingdom can be explained by visiting an island offshore. This
Oh,
is where things
God.
take a turn for the fucking gruesome. It's not a breeding experiment, it's a breeding factory. Powerful members of the Gnome Council have been kidnapping women and forcing them to birth half-ogres. At first, this would always kill the hope.
Oh, God. Oh, man. Yeah, I kind of knew this from the comments, but just actually seeing this, the freaking gnomes. Okay, yeah. Yeah, they deserve the hate. They deserve all of the hate. These poor women getting kidnapped.
Host, but after developing some new surgical techniques, they could get a few more out of him. The only items you can find on Half-Ogre Island are pretty grim. This is when you realize whenever you see powerful gnomes, they're always flanked by a half-ogre bodyguard. They're generally dumb, but loyal and controllable. The dissolving of the royal family makes more sense now. When you go back to report it, your contact is gone, and a gnome is there. He says he's part of the investigators, but it's clear he isn't. He explained that gnomes gained more wealth from investing in technology, but the other races didn't like that and would physically overpower them to beat and rob them. So members with influence began trying to breed the perfect bodyguards. They first kidnapped people no one would miss, and then moved up to grabbing political rivals and their families. The royalty was overthrown and worked into this plan at the same time. The queen birthed 3 before dying. This continued
What
on for
the
years, but they don't need to do it anymore,
fuck?
as there are now farms of female half-ogres that will constantly create new bodyguards. Then he goes, maybe it's real, who knows. If you kill this creep, it says his alignment is good, so maybe he didn't participate in it directly. Or something, I don't know. If you take evidence to the press, the journalist is horrified, promising to write a story, and when you come back he's gone. Replaced with someone who doesn't know what you're talking about.
Well. Oh my goodness. Wow. There are just... I have no words. Okay. I don't really know how to describe this in English. Honestly, I don't even know if I should talk about this. Okay, so let's just say that there are certain services here that are pretty mundane things that people use basically every single day. But my mother back when she was in college, she was trying to do like a documentary about this thing. And then it turned out it had connections to the mafia, gangsters, and there was actually turf wars over it. And this was something that everybody within that kind of business knew about, but every outsider doesn't. And so she kind of had to drop the case because it was getting a little too dangerous. It's a grim reminder that there are probably plenty of things out there that we take for granted that, you know, kind of just originate from these horrific things. And if you get a little too deep, you're going to start running into the cover-ups and potentially put yourself in danger here. Actually, I guess a closer example to all of us would be like the batteries that we use in our smartphones. I mean, if you know, you know, but we kind of just take it for granted.
If you return to the island, all the evidence is gone, and that is the end of the quest. It was a side quest. It's a sickening thing to stumble onto the first time you play the game and completely changes how you see the world now. It also makes Klug more tragic, though thankfully he's too stupid to even start the quest line. It's a bizarre, dark inclusion with no direct way to resolve it. You can't really undo it either, only expose it. You could obliterate every gnome on site, but you'll never get the text prompt saying the situation is fixed. You can resolve it indirectly by completely destabilizing the country in the ending slides. That would mean the council would lose its power, and maybe the fantasy eugenics program would end, but I guess a whole nation of people would suffer for the crimes of their creepy elite, but nothing is new there. What was happening in the main quest again? Something about dark elves and a prophecy?
Oh yeah, that's right.
The big issue with
main
this
quest
is that it's a side quest with very direct...
I can't believe, though, that we really went for it. Like, this is a plot line that the developers thought of. It's kind of insane, but it's also quite impactful with how horrific and shocking it is. And yet it's also just such a part of this universe's culture.
Direct consequences. You immediately know how it's a problem and how huge it is, and you're likely getting it in a period of having no idea where things are going, and it immediately grabs your attention away from it. There are interesting ideas happening in the main story, but this immediately upstages it. It's one of the most mind-melting, horrible reveals in an RPG, and it's just a side thing. It's hard to recover from that one. I'll try to get back to it. You gain an audience with the Dark Elves by claiming to be one of the assassins who did you in. Honestly, they're similar to regular elves, just with a lot more racism. Elves think they're the master race even though they won't say it. Dark Elves know they are and scream it. So this trip to the literal Eagle's Nest reveals a lot. The Black Mountain Clan dwarves were banished to the Void. This is where Nazardin and the Council threw the most evil people in back in the day, including Aranax. Arcanum has magical wards that are keeping him trapped in the Void, and the dwarves were supposed to build a machine inside the Void to bust him out. Aranax is extremely magical, so the wards have a heavy effect on him. Stenar is the opposite, so is able to escape from the Void using the machine, even though it's not ready for Aranax yet. The wards don't affect him as strongly, so he got out to warn people. Bates wasn't the cause, he was an excuse. The Dark Elves want Aranax back. If you're evil, you could join with them from here to get to the ending, but you miss out on some reveals, so I'll stick with the path of good for now. If Virgil is still with you, he takes off now. The stakes were high enough that he has something to take care of in case the world ends. Returning to the elves, their leader will cryptically tell you that the answer lies with Nazardin, which if you are him, meaning you are the answer or something like that, but Nazardin does have a physical form. The main Panari temple holds the body of Nazardin beneath it. The story is really starting to come together now. It's all lining up, and maybe as a necromancer I could just bring the dude back and ask him what's going on. Sadly, a bunch of early church records were destroyed, but it is known you're not supposed to mess with Nazardin's body. From here you get into some shenanigans unpacking their religion. Virgil is also in town, murdered by gangsters. With the Resurrect Scroll, you can bring him back, and he'll explain how he was trying to atone for his past life. He lost someone because of his actions and couldn't live with it anymore. But when Virgil died, he saw him in the afterlife and felt at peace. The afterlife is a quiet, tranquil place in Arcanum, and Virgil carries that with him now. You celebrate his new oneness by breaking into the Panari temple and digging up their Christ figure. It's not...
Hey, what better way to celebrate, yeah? I wonder what consequences this action is gonna have.
Nazardin, it's not even an elf. It's an old Panari saint. This has disturbing implications, and after further research, you find out the Panari faith has been interfered with for hundreds of years. I can't get into why yet, but it's clear Nazardin's real remains are on the island of Thanatos, also known as Evil Tabasco Gorilla Island. After a trek of that monkey madness, you find an old man who might know where to go. After only a bit of talking, it becomes clear that this is Nazardin. He used his powerful abilities to extend his life and not much else, and Aranax is his son. Aranax single-handedly wiped out the ancient Vendigroth civilization out of fear of their technology. His crime was great enough to be boinked with a void sentence. except that he was so magic and it took so much energy, it weakened the barrier between the worlds. So the wards were created to help maintain that barrier. Nazardan exiled himself, and the last council member put a plan in place. Knowledge of how to maintain the wards could be lost over time, so he founded the Panari religion primarily to include rites to maintain the wards. They'll keep doing the rituals even if they don't know why. At a later point, the
Gotcha. Huh. Well, that was a twist. But this is also a very clever use of religion in order to continue to maintain these wards. It's a similar fashion to 40k, where the Cult Mechanicus does like these rituals to maintain technology. But, you know, it was just kind of passed down and kept as like prayers and chants, when in actuality, they're basically like doing the usual maintenance or boot up sequence for those technologies. It's not like they know exactly what it is, but they just know that when they do it, the tech keeps on running or starts up and stuff like that.
The Dark Elves made sneaky adjustments to the religion. The wards would no longer be maintained well, and Aranax would be hyped up as a mythological Satan figure instead of a very real elf supremacist who wants to break out. That way, the threat of him won't be taken seriously. Having a religion formed and then manipulated over the power struggles of very mortal beings is an insane reveal. You're not the chosen one.
It is, and that's... I don't think I've ever seen a plot go this deep with their fantasy of religion. It's like, this is the kind of thing that you expect from real history. Not something a bunch of people made for one video game.
It's all bullshit, and Jesus is right there. He's deeply unhappy about being worshipped, but realistically understands he can't do much about it.
Yeah.
Fortunately, there is a way to turbo mega kill Aranax. Before Vendigroth got cataclysmically own-zoned, they invented a device that would wipe out even the most powerful mage. If you go get that, Nazardan will banish you into the void, and you can take down Aranax. So you go... So you get it. Kiss your mortal coil goodbye, and welcome to the void. The void is strange. In their eternal wisdom, Nazardan and the Council didn't actually know if anything was over here. There are the remains of some kind of civilization. Whether they dwelled here and blew themselves up, or colonized this area, or what, is never explained. There are theories that cycles of tech and magic have gone on forever, and without a doubt, magic used to have 8 spells in a school instead of 5.
That would actually kind of make sense. Like, there's a long-lost history with this ancient civilization that clearly had technology. We just don't really know about them. So perhaps they already had their own struggle with magic users, and then it just swaps back and forth. There are certainly plenty of stories that are like that. The one that comes to my mind is Myth, but in Myth, it was a little bit different. Not going to go into detail about that in case of spoilers, but for those of you guys who watch the Myth reactions, you guys know.
The Void could be one of those sides taken to an extreme end. There's a lot of combat with Void creatures, and in the first structure, shockingly quickly, there's Aranax.
Many thanks for releasing me from my horribly lengthy incarceration, sir.
What's up,
No,
dude?
I'm here to murder you.
Now, why would you want to do that?
Aren't you out to conquer the world?
I have no such fantasies of revenge. I have been imprisoned here for nearly 2,000 years, which is more than enough time to regret the mistakes of one's youth.
Aranax had nothing to do with any of this. It was all Kurgan. You remember Kurgan, right? The first necromancer who's barely mentioned throughout the entire game? Or maybe his influence has been more noticeable, but you weren't looking for it. This is bold.
Oh my god. What? It is pretty hilarious, but also kind of realistic in a way. That, you know, this villain who at one point in time had some sort of ideals against the world and so acted upon them and was sealed away for so many years. Kind of ended up regretting their actions and letting go of that hatred and actually becoming a better person. It's like he's not just a two-dimensional character who's just meant to be the bad guy. What a strange concept. The fact that good people can do bad things, or that bad people can do good things, and it's just not black and white. But now we're just switching the focus to Kurgan, one who I don't even recall his name, to be honest with you.
Only know Aranax on a very surface level, and only because you're paying attention and trying to look out for more information about him. As a villain, he's been kept so vague that he's not very interesting. Now it's revealed the big bad evil guy is a puppet master who we know even less about. Most evil genius puppet master villains will show their hand more for dramatic effect. Only sharply looking for it on replay can you see the tiny hints of Kurgan's manipulation. The Dark Elves thought they had their hand over a major religion and a large part of civilization. In the end, they were being played too. The Aranax they want to come back can never come back. He's had time to reflect and grow past what he was. On the other side, Kurgan has been in the Void longer. He was the only human on the Ancient Council. For all we know, they chucked him into a new civilization and he broke it and twisted it to his will. Whatever he's up to, it clearly wasn't for ego. He's been masquerading as someone else and promising a dark savior who will never show up. Said savior, who was a living holocaust, has been there 2,000 years and still barely knows what Kurgan's up to. This dude is deadly. Aranex can join your party.
What? Oh, that's awesome. Bro, this is such like a big brain twist. And I feel like it's working. Like it's not some cheap twist like, oh, that random guy that you saw there is actually the true villain. But with all this subtle foreshadowing towards it, it would just make this reveal so much more impactful when you're playing the game. I can imagine those moments where you're just thinking back on things and you're like, wait a minute. Ah, so that's how it's all connected.
You can even wander the void recruiting history's literal greatest monsters to join you in the fight. They've all been banished here too for similar unspeakable crimes. Entering Kurgan's castle, most of the Black Mountain clan is slaughtered, though there are a few survivors. The device is ready, and Kurgan awaits.
Greetings. Long have I waited for your arrival, and finally this moment has come.
Once again, great voice acting, but I couldn't help but take notice of the T-posing demon standing in front of us.
I am Kurgan, first of the necromancers, voyager in the lands of the dead.
His delivery will change a bit based on whether or not Aranex is present. No matter the case, you're still going to have lots of questions, and he's happy to talk. In his mortal life, he was obsessed with necromancy and death, and here in the void, that's only gone farther. He's gained some new insight into the matter after thousands of years.
Yes. Look at me. And what do you see? A monster? An abomination? You've no idea what I've discovered. You see with eyes tainted by life, and all which that accursed state embodies. My vision is clear because of those magics you hold in disdain. And the Council, it is they I have to thank for it.
You don't age in the void, and it's hard to measure the passage of time. This explains why Stenar actually called Gates the boy. While Kurgan kept in the shadows until now, it's clear that he actually does have a gigantic ego. The Dark Elves had no clue.
Yes, I know. Ironic, isn't it? It was on my ears that their feeble and pathetic cries had fallen. To
Big
me,
brain.
Kurgan, who had defeated their master and thrown him in chains. Kurgan, who had manipulated them into subverting the Panari and weakening the wards. Kurgan, who used them to send me the dwarves of the Black Mountain clan, who have now finished the bridge back to Arcanum.
His plan is to obliterate all life. On its own, this is nothing new. We've seen edgelords and media do this all the time. What makes it interesting is that Arcanum's setting has established a lot more. Here, there is without a doubt an afterlife. Playing as a necromancer, you're even more hyper-aware of that. You talk to spirits unhappy to be back all the time. Kurgan sees life as being pointless and painful. If there's a serene and peaceful afterlife, then why bother with the torment of living?
Yes, this all makes so much more sense now with these added details. Because, like, I had known about this particular boss, although I didn't know about the twist from Seth's video. But with the fact that he's a necromancer and that we had set up this idea of the afterlife being a serene place, which we learned from Virgil, I believe. Of course, he would be acutely aware of this, and he would maybe prefer that over life itself. So his perspective makes so much sense.
We've seen the horrors this world can unleash on its people, and he wants to end all of it. No more.
Oh, well, we've totally seen the horrors, especially with the gnomes, like Jesus.
More struggle, no more suffering, just peace. Virgil, who has died and come back, thinks he has a point, though he doesn't agree everyone should instantly succumb to dying.
Of course not. I made my choice a long time ago, and I choose to stand with you. Yes, there is pain in life, pain and loss and sorrow. But there is also joy and the pleasures of growing and learning. You can't have one without the other, and I wouldn't want to sacrifice either. But in the end, I stand with you, whatever your choice.
Wait, hold up a minute. Isn't this literally like one of the paths you can take in Elden Ring? Like if you choose the Frenzied Flame ending, Melina basically comes up to you and says something along these lines. That yes, while there is suffering in the lands between, there is also hope and beauty within it. Of course, with that ending, you kind of choose to burn everything down and return everything to nothingness. It's actually really cool to see the same basic idea being told in a very different way, but and its core concept is the same. It really depends on the creator of that work and how they want to convey it, what their vision for that core idea is.
I can no longer tolerate the atrocities that this life has brought about. There will be peace. There will be quiet. Life will no longer be. And so I go to Arcanum to put an end to it. And then I will join the souls of the dead when it is done.
You have a few options from here. You can join Kurgan, join him then betray him to try and become a new god, fight him in an awkward, bad boss fight, or convince him out of his plan and to let you kill him with the Vendigroth device. To persuade him, you have to convince him that his perspective is flawed. Not every soul is in pain when it comes back. Not to mention our perspective of reality is incredibly limited. Our very views of life and existence can be flawed and skewed. Not everyone is miserable to be alive, and the dead don't all wish they never were. It does seem silly to convince him with this after so long, but even he seems to be embarrassed by it being pointed out. His own ego is growing to a point where he thought he had the best answer for everyone and not just himself.
I mean, that's kind of what happens to people. You can't convince somebody who's already reasoned themselves into a position on whatever subject that they're talking about. If we were all logical creatures, then we would have civil conversations, but that's not always the case. A lot of it is very emotional, and that emotion can make us blind to the facts, so it's perfectly understandable why he wouldn't see this other side of things. He only sees his own side.
It's still his ultimate conclusion, but he accepts it won't be the same for everyone, and they should make their own choice. I can also forgive it because he drops one of the hardest hitting lines I've heard from a villain.
Yes, I thank you. And I'm sorry. So very, very sorry. Perhaps some souls are born into death. They never knew how to live. Goodbye, traveler. My road ends here. I wish you luck on yours.
The device activates, Kurgan gets his wish, and Arcanum is saved. Meeting him for the first time, it felt like such a sudden pull that I really didn't like it. It seemed like such a last-second addition without a lot behind it, and I wanted more of the magic versus technology angle. I've come to like this more and more as I've replayed it over the years. It stops the story from being too one-note about progress and gives you a lot to chew on. Then you get to see all your various endings, except the one that blitzes past the screen right here, and a few others sometimes. The ending slides can still be finicky and broken.
Okay, 1 second. I'm actually really curious. What the heck was that? What was that image? Oh. What these things are just like 1 or 2 frames. Jesus.
Right here, and a few others sometimes. The ending slides can still be finicky and broken, like the game. Damn it. Arcanum is such a rich game and setting and multiple themes. It has so many mechanics to play with and is one of the most replayable RPGs I've ever played. It's also a balanced disaster zone and has more bugs than an Amazon rainforest. This is the most deserving CRPG of getting the Enhanced Edition or HD treatment. You know, it's cool games like Planescape Torment have gotten that, where people don't have to hunt down all the fixes and patches anymore. But if you were a person who did do that, you're still getting about the same game. This one has so much that could be polished up. Not even balanced, just the game not breaking down. A lot of people consider this one of the all-time greats, and I do too, but it's running on fumes more and more every year. I'd like something to happen with it. I did convince the Goglins at GOG to put it on sale for a bit over $1 for a while. Even then it's typically only $5 or so, which is still well beyond worth it. It's just so easy to see how much better the game could be. With proper quality of life features, the game could shine so much more, but with proper balance and combat, in a game tackling all kinds of issues in a cool setting in this day and age, I think Arcanum could make a comeback. It might be a pipe dream, but I'll crawl into that pipe every night and sleep in it.
It is an unfortunate reality for so many games that we've seen that just have these amazing worlds and amazing stories to tell. It's just, they came out in a different time without the proper funding and not enough time to cook. I feel this way about the Claymore anime too. like Claymore, I feel like would have been so much more popular in the West if it had come out at around the time when Attack on Titan suddenly burst into popularity. Unfortunately, we never got a continuation to that because the DVD sales in Japan were not very good. But it just becomes more and more clear that with a lot of these things, it often depends on timing as well.
Janky and awkward, but there's so much to like about it, and so much about Arcanum that's memorable. Will Arcanum Enhanced Edition ever happen? Maybe not. Probably not. We could be stuck with a charming mess until a proper successor comes out one day. All I know for sure is, this is a pretty good banana bread recipe.
Yes! We got it! Confirm, the banana bread is good. We need that recipe, bro.
What's my favorite Red Alert 2 unit for voice and appearance? This is a really difficult one, actually. I really like Desolators, but Rocketeer lines are burned into my brain.
I know Red Alert is a very classic RTS game. I have never delved into RTS games because I was super afraid of them. But who knows? If I get super into RTS games, then maybe someday. But yeah, as I said, we've got a whole massive backlog to get through already.
And I really like Mirage tanks. I could ask anyone this, and I feel like there are so few wrong answers. Have I played Gloomwood, and does it live up to the hype? I have played it, and there's a lot to like about it, and I think they might be regretting the Thief with Guns URL. I feel like I'll have a better grasp on it when they open up the city. Apparently the build before I played it had no armored huntsmen, and that sounds like it would be really easy to get through. It's an early access game, so who knows where it could go. I don't think it meets the hype now, but I'm optimistic. Val Sung, Erda wants... I mentioned a while back I was going to do a video on Sins of a Solar Empire and a mod. Is that still happening? It is, though it'll probably be next year at this rate because the end of this one's pretty packed already. It's just been a year for me. I felt pretty behind on where I want to be with YouTube stuff, and I'm trying to catch up with that. I had no idea a sequel was going to come out, like ever, since Sins of a Solar Empire has been going for 15 years now. Anyways, I'll see you in the next one.
I think it's undeniable that this game has so many fantastic ideas packed into it, with a very refreshing take on storytelling that we don't often see. I think all this game really needed was maybe just some sprucing up, some quality of life, and a better combat system. And maybe it could have become mainstream. I mean, we can always hope that there could be a remake at some point, but it is just such a shame. This intricately woven together universe will never see the light of day outside of this one game. I honestly wish more games nowadays would tackle these kind of themes like head on, just like this game did. But I feel like developers and companies, rather, have become much more afraid to push boundaries, and that's a damn shame, because if they don't push boundaries, then nothing innovative really comes out of it. It's just the same old, same old. Not that there aren't any fantastic games that are coming out nowadays, like there are plenty. You just kind of have to know where to look for it, and a lot of them are coming from the indie scene as well, which I suppose is a good thing. Overall, though, I'm really glad that you guys suggested I check out this one. This one had a lot of the political intrigue that I enjoy from my media, but I wasn't born in time to play this. And maybe someday I gotta try out that banana bread recipe. I'm sure it's online somewhere, but yeah, that'll be it from me. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you all enjoyed, and I'll catch you in the next one.